In October 2004, a journalist knocked on a door in South Los Angeles and found the one man who had seen it all, lying in a hospital bed, watching John Wayne movies, and still refusing to say a single word. Wait, because that refusal is the whole story. This man had been inside Michael Jackson's life for 35 years. Closer than any manager, any family member, any lawyer. He was there for every private moment, every crisis, every decision that never made the news. And when the world was tearing itself apart trying to figure out who Michael Jackson really was, this man chose silence. Not for money, not for loyalty to a family that had stopped calling, for a reason that will take the rest of this story to understand. His name was Bill Bray, 79 years old, lying in a cramped apartment in South Los Angeles while his wife Gail slept on a couch across the hall so she could hear him during the night. The television ran old westerns. Nobody from the Jackson family had called in 5 years. This is the story of the man who knew everything and told nobody. A man who carried the king of pop in his arms before the world knew his name and was left behind before the world stopped saying it. What exactly did Bill Bray know? And why did he choose silence over everything else? The answer starts in 1968. Notice the year. Bill Bray was a former police officer, 43 years old, when he went to work for Motown Records as head of security. Then Joseph Jackson walked into the building with a single instruction: keep Michael safe. When Bray met Michael for the first time, he didn't see a future superstar. He saw a child who stood very still in a very loud room and watched everything, taking in details adults had already walked past. Bray had seen a lot of rooms. He had never seen a child look at one like that. What Joseph didn't say, what nobody could have said in 1968, was that this assignment would last 30 years. That in a world where everyone around Michael would eventually want something from him, Bill Bray would be the one person who never did. Look at what the early 1970s looked like from where Bray was standing. Arenas now, not clubs. Thousands pressed against barricades, screaming, reaching. Michael was 13, small for his age, moving through airports and backstage corridors surrounded by grabbing hands and flashing lights. And every single time he came off a stage, there was one place he went: straight to Bill Bray. Gail later told a journalist what those moments looked like. When Michael finished a show, she said, he would run straight off the stage and jump into Bill's arms. Not his mother's, not his brother's, Bill's. A 13-year-old boy, still in his costume, still breathing hard, running across the backstage floor and climbing into the arms of this tall, steady former police officer who would carry him away from the noise. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. The person Michael ran to was not famous, not connected to the music or the money. Just a man who was always there and never wanted anything except to make sure the boy was safe. Bill Jackson, that's what Michael reportedly called him, because the name felt right. And somewhere in both their minds, though neither said it yet, there was already a clock ticking. The kind that only starts when something is too good to last. But here is the question nobody asked then, and almost nobody has asked since. When the moment finally came, when Michael stood at the edge of the biggest decision of his career and had to choose between the world his father built and the world he needed to build for himself, who was in the room? Not the lawyers, not the label. The one person he trusted enough to say the unsayable. By 1978, the Jacksons had moved to Epic Records, and Bray moved with them. Not because he had to, because that's what you do when a job has become something else entirely. Michael was recording off the wall now, developing a vision that Joseph's structure couldn't contain. And by now it was no longer just a bond. It was knowledge, complete, unedited, unsanitized knowledge of who Michael actually was, behind the performance and the business. He knew because he was there, and because he never used what he saw as currency. Bill Bray just kept it. Like a vault that had no door. Remember that quality as we move forward, because in a few years, it would be tested in ways neither of them could have predicted. January 27, 1984. The Shrine Auditorium, Los Angeles. 3,000 people in the seats. Michael Jackson filming a Pepsi commercial, the sixth take, descending a staircase through a cascade of pyrotechnic sparks. Bill Bray was backstage watching, ready. The sparks went off too early. Michael's hair caught. For a moment he kept dancing. Because his training was so deep, his body continued the routine even as his scalp began to burn. Then the chaos. Crew members rushing the stage, hands patting out the flames. Bill Bray was already moving before anyone else. Stop for a moment and consider what he witnessed in those hours. A 25-year-old man who would wave his gloved hand at the crowd even as the ambulance doors closed because the image always mattered, processing the reality of having his scalp burned in front of 3,000 people. The pain from those burns would eventually lead Michael toward the prescription painkillers that reshaped his final decades. Bill Bray watched it happen. He never said a word. What came next is the part the world still doesn't fully know. During recovery at Brotman Memorial, Michael began visiting the other burn patients. No cameras, not as a gesture. Sitting with them in those corridors. When Pepsi offered $1.5 million, he donated every cent to the burn center. He didn't keep a dollar. Bill Bray watched a man in genuine physical pain choose to use that money for others in pain. By late 1984, the Victory Tour was underway, and the tension between Michael and Joseph had become impossible to ignore. Michael had Thriller behind him now. His solo career had already outpaced everything the family built together, and Joseph was still the manager. Bill Bray was watching this tension build the way you watch a weather system from a distance. You know what's coming. You just don't know exactly when. Listen, because what happened on the last night of that tour is the moment the whole story turns on. And Bill Bray was the only one who saw it coming. Dodger Stadium. December 9th, 1984. The final show. Before he went on stage that night, Michael talked to Bill. The specifics of what was said belonged to the private record Bill kept his entire life. But what happened on stage is documented. Michael stepped to the microphone and told the crowd this was the last time the Jacksons would perform together. Quietly, clearly, with the finality of a man who had already decided. Then he performed. Then he walked off the stage. Joseph was somewhere in that building. And Michael had just dismantled it all in front of thousands of people. The way you close a door that won't open again. Bill Bray was at the center of that night. The man with no stake in the outcome except that Michael should be okay. What he said in that room and why it mattered more than any lawyer's advice is something we will come back to. The years between 1985 and 1993 were the years Michael became something the English language didn't have a word for. Bad. Dangerous. The Beatles' catalog for $47 million. Neverland. Genuinely planetary. And Bill Bray's name appears on the credit rolls of every major tour. Victory. Bad. Dangerous. History. He was Michael's infrastructure, invisible and essential. You don't see foundations, you only notice when they're gone. Wait, because that last word matters. Gone. How a man that embedded, that trusted, that necessary could simply disappear from Michael Jackson's life is the question nobody asked loudly enough while there was still time. Inside that decade, the circle around Michael was getting larger and more dangerous. New people who wanted to position themselves inside what he'd built. And with them came jealousy. That's the word Gayle used, with a directness still stunning decades later. Several people in Michael's inner circle wanted Bill out. Two names, Norma Stykos, his personal secretary, who would vanish after the 1993 scandal, and Wayne Nagin, another security figure who went silent after the same period. Because in a world where everyone had an angle, the one without an angle was the most disruptive presence of all. Bill Bray found out about the pressure. He kept going to work. Here is the thing about that sentence. It took 30 seconds to write. It took a man who had given a quarter century to one family, who had no leverage and no platform, everything he had left to live it. He found out people were working to remove him. He went back the next morning. No confrontation, no ultimatum, just the work again. because Michael still needed someone in the room who wanted nothing. And then 1993 arrived. The allegations that surfaced that summer cracked the foundation of everything Michael had built, generating a noise so constant it became the only thing anyone could talk about. And Bill Bray, the one man inside Michael's world longer than anyone alive, was nowhere to be found. He was in a hospital bed. He had been there before the allegations broke. Cancer. A stroke that had taken his speech and much of his mobility. By the time the world was asking where Bill Bray was, he was fighting a different battle entirely. In a room nobody visited, Gail told journalists the people who knew Michael best kept saying the same thing during those chaos years. Where's Bill Bray? He would never have let this happen, but he didn't materialize. The Jackson family did not call. The office paid his medical bills, technically, but no visits, no personal contact. 5 years of silence from the people her husband had given his life to. It's not even that Bill wants money from Michael, Gail told the journalist who came to that hospital bed. He just doesn't want to say anything that would hurt him. Read that sentence again. A man abandoned by the person he'd devoted 3 decades to, his concern was still about Michael. Still about maintaining a silence that would cost nothing to break and everything to keep. There are not many people in the world like that. And now we can close the Dodger Stadium question. What did Bill say in those minutes before the final show? Nobody recorded it. But the answer is in what happened next. The quietness of how Michael walked onto that stage. The steadiness of his voice when he made the announcement. The absence of hesitation. Whatever Bill said, it was enough. The last counsel a man gives when the person in front of him has already decided and just needs someone to say, "You are right, and you are ready." The journalist who visited in 2004 asked directly, did Michael have secrets the world didn't know? In 30 years of absolute proximity, had Bray learned things relevant to the questions everyone was asking? Bill Bray laughed. Just for a moment, the guard came down. What came out was not a revelation, a deflection, a private joke about something unrelated. And then the guard came back up. He would not say what he knew. He would not do anything that could hurt the man who had left him behind. That is the definition of a certain kind of love. The kind that doesn't require reciprocity to remain intact. Bill Bray retired in 1996 at 70. The years after were quiet in the way that only abandonment produces. Gail slept on a couch to hear him breathe. The television played westerns. Outside, the Santa Monica freeway moved at its constant roar, indifferent to the room behind the glass. A man who had stood inside the greatest musical career of the 20th century, invisible to that same person now as completely as if he had never existed. In the spring of 2005, Bill Bray died. He was 80 years old. Remember the journalist who knocked on that door 8 months earlier? Remember the television, the couch, the silence. Hold all of that, because what happened next reframes everything. Michael Jackson's spokesperson released a statement. Michael is very, very, very saddened to learn of the passing of Bill Bray, who was a longtime friend and mentor to him. 3 verys. That repetition is what happens when language is inadequate to the feeling. Sources said when Michael was told, he became hysterical. Not sad, not composed, hysterical, the word people use when emotion exceeds what the body can contain. He outlived Bill by 4 years, dying June 25, 2009 at 50 years old. And now something nobody in that apartment in 2004 could have predicted. In April 2026, a film called Michael opened in theaters worldwide. The authorized biography, directed by Antoine Fuqua, starring Michael's nephew Jafar. Running through the center of it, in scene after scene, is Bill Bray, played by Caelan Durrell Jones, who spent months studying photographs of a man who had made himself invisible on purpose. Critics noticed. One wrote that the scenes between Michael and Bill hit their mark by showing how Michael spent his life seeking father figures in others. Another called their friendship the film's most notable relationship. The emotional center of the film, several noted, wasn't the performances or the confrontations with Joseph. It was the quiet, steady presence of a man who asked for nothing and gave everything. Think about what that means. The man closest to Michael Jackson, who carried him in his arms, who stood at the pivot point of a career, who absorbed 30 years of private truth and never spent it, died in obscurity. And 20 years later, $100 million is being spent to put him back in the story where he always belonged. He said he didn't want to say anything that would hurt Michael. That was the whole answer. After 35 years, the thing Bill Bray most wanted the world to know was not about him at all. A direction, a posture, a choice made so deeply and so long ago that by the time anyone asked, it had stopped being a choice and had become simply who he was. The man who knew everything. The man who told nobody. The man who, even at the end, in a cramped apartment with a flickering television and a wife asleep on a couch, was still, in the only way left to him, protecting the boy who had once run across a backstage floor and jumped into his arms. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think.